Welcome to my show, the Energetic Agriculture Podcast. I'm David Wexler, and I'm going to show you how you could massively improve the growth of your plants using electricity, magnetism, and beyond. Today, I'd like to give you a brief introduction into the world of electrohorticulture, more commonly called electroculture. Most people know that plants respond to watering, sunlight, and good soil. But did you know that they also respond to electric fields? While mankind has always been seeking ways to improve the growth of their crops, it has been since the late 1700s that scientists have started using electricity as a means of improving crop yields. Through the application of electric fields to plants, soil, or even the air surrounding them, we can induce massive physiological changes that include the improvement of germination, growth rate, yields, flavor, disease resistance, and more. To start things off, I think it would be cool to share my origin story around all of this. When I was in high school, my father worked with me on building an old-school high-voltage device called the Van de Graaff generator. It's the typical thing you see in science museums that has a huge electrically charged sphere on the end of it, and I was always playing around with it. In the old articles I found describing high-voltage electrostatics, I came across some materials about using electricity for growing plants. This field of study had a name: electroculture. From the late 1800s to the early 1930s, the field exploded with a surge of experimentation, articles, and books. But after a period of controversy in the 1920s, most of the information withered away except for a few traces here and there. Since then, research just slightly picked up during the 60s, 70s, and 80s, with some new research from 2000 to the present. After reading about the ways these researchers were able to achieve fantastic results by electrifying their plants in various ways, I decided to try an experiment of my own. So about 12 years or so ago, I decided to experiment with Romanesco broccoli by doing a side-by-side comparison. For this first electrification experiment, I turned a plastic lettuce container into a makeshift pot and planted some seeds in it. The others I planted in a typical fashion, in 2-inch cell pots. Both sets of plants were grown under the exact same conditions, including soil depth, light, heat, and ventilation, but the first set of plants was electrified. Although I was completely skeptical about the project, I was absolutely surprised when after 1 week I saw the results. The electrified group of plants had stalks that were twice as long as the non-electrified group. After 1 month, the differences between the two sets of plants was astonishing. The experimental group had leaves that were almost twice as wide as the other, and the color of the entire group of electrified plants was lush, deep, rainforest green, compared to light medium green of the non-electrified set of plants. Later on, the growth was even more pronounced, with the electrified plants towering over the control group. The experiment turned out to be a great success. These initial results and my continuing success in growing plants with electricity far exceeded my expectations. As you could tell, I was totally amazed by the experience. Yet I didn't totally believe it myself. I needed to find out more. Who else was using this totally cool growing method? It turned out that aside from some very old papers on the subject, the only ones who talked about this at all were cannabis growers. Makes sense if you think about it. In any case, from what I observed on the forums, cannabis growers seemed to be very open-minded to experimental growth approaches. The problem I ran into was that most of the time on these boards, there would be a lot of skepticism. Even when positive results were shown, they just couldn't believe it to be true. I actually ran into this effect with modern-day agricultural scientists and business people also. While looking for people to connect and collaborate with, I chat with the local scientists and so on in my local ag science community, and they would also scoff at the effects I've seen. Another place I've read about the effects of it were from regular old people on various gardening forums. A number of people pointed out that with passing thunderstorms, the next day it almost always looked like their lawns and gardens received a boost in vitality, with colors that looked brighter, stems and leaves that were not only larger, but also way greener in color. Could that have been a side effect of the high-voltage lightning bolts illuminating the sky? Other people retorted against it, saying that thunderstorms created more nitrogen in the atmosphere, and that was the explanation for the boost in growth. The whole argument fascinated me, and yet the effects were real. In the end, it kicked off a 4-year, very part-time journey into the writing of my book, that had the primary purpose of explaining that the science behind this technology was real. As I started diving into plant electrophysiology, I learned about the electrochemical mechanisms that were at work behind the scenes. I realized that this could be the scientific proof I needed to show that electroculture was, in fact, a real phenomenon. And while the increase in atmospheric nitrogen probably is a factor in why everything looks more lush after a thunderstorm, it's not the whole story. I also found it interesting that electroculture hit peak popularity, at least in England and the US, 1915s to 1930s or so. It was being tested in a number of universities, like UMass Amherst, and at botanical gardens, like ones in St. Louis, Missouri, and in London, England. Many different types of systems were being developed and tested out, from low-voltage direct current systems that used large copper and zinc plates connected with wires and submerged into the ground, to massive installations of high-voltage, high-tension wires suspended above acres of crops for the purpose of delivering constant doses of high voltage to the plants, mimicking the effects of passing thunderstorms. But why don't we hear about it today? How come so few people have even heard of such a thing? My theory is that after the ending of World War I, agricultural-minded businessmen decided that bomb-making materials, being high in nitrogen, could be reused as synthetic fertilizers. And while electroculture was in its heyday, it was touted as an inexpensive way of massively improving farm outputs. I suspect that there was a major campaign within the ag industry that was pushing the use of consumable farm inputs because there was a ton of money to be made selling more and more chemicals than ever before. I suspect that this is what killed electroculture from the world's eyes. Today, and over the last 10 to 20 years or so, there has been a resurgence in going back to natural methods of farming. The organic movement has moved out of the fringes and into the mainstream. Healthy crops are more important than ever before, and with it, new forms of energetic agriculture are starting to be looked at once again. Thanks for listening. I would like you to know that I have a whole ton of content that I'm looking forward to sharing with you on this subject. We're going to be covering all sorts of things, ranging from growing with electricity and magnetism to the effects of other types of energies on crop growth, like sound, vibration, light, frequency, and a whole ton more beyond that. Hit the subscribe button and follow me on Twitter via the handle ElectroGrow. I can also be found on my website, electricfertilizer.com. Come check it out. Stay tuned as we continue with sharing the amazing world of energetic agriculture. See you next time.